podcast where we bring you the latest in gaming news, indie reviews, and everything else under the sun. My name is Kendall, and I'm here with my co-host.
Tony, aka once, twice, three times a Deadpool.
You can't mess with the Deadpool. Honestly, you can't mess with Deadpool being an Eagles fan. Like what we do on this podcast. But we are not here to talk about the Eagles for once. Even though shout out to Saquon, we are back,
Word.
back again for another episode, and we did miss last week. We apologize for that. We had some technical issues that we're still kind of working through. I'm not gonna lie, but getting there. But you guys got a chance to vote on what you wanted this episode to be about, since it was the 52nd episode in honor of the Eagles winning Super Bowl 52. So our episode choice this week was another console retrospective, just like we did last week with the Genesis. Shout out to my man James, who was there last week. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today, but he'll be back for future episodes. But for now, we are going to do a highly anticipated console for us, at least. I wanted to talk about it. So the Super Nintendo, one of the goats, honestly, I would say, like, just to start it off with that energy, because we already know what's up with the Super Nintendo. But Tony, if you want to like kind of go through your history with the console, and I'll kind of tell mine real quick.
So yeah, I didn't grow up with one in my house, but I spent so much time at my uncle's house who had one that I basically grew up with one. Um, Everything about it just like it's hard to replace that type of gaming experience. It's hard to replace it. It's hard to replicate it. It's hard to top it. I mean, just just a great fucking console. I mean, even at the stage where because I think the Super Nintendo was the one that kind of started to usher in multiplayer. Like the
Hmm.
Genesis, you had multiple ports, but Super Nintendo was the one. I mean, we'll get into it with the games and stuff, but I feel like
Right.
this is the one that really started to get the multiplayer thing going.
That's interesting. I guess I've never actually sat down and thought about that, but it kind of did kind of usher that in. I mean, you had your games here and there, you know what I mean, playing with your friends on even like stuff like the NES, but yeah, yeah, no, it was huge for couch co-op, we'll say. Um, Honestly, I was the same way. Like, I didn't have a Super Nintendo in the household growing up, like during the Super Nintendo era. But I had cousins who had it, I had friends who had it, so I got a lot of opportunities to play it. And then as time goes on, you get a chance to play those games on other consoles, because Super Nintendo games do not get old. That's the thing about them. Like, it's unfortunate that we talk about all this stuff before we get to the categories, but it's just facts. Like, we all know, that era of pixelated games is timeless in a way that the era before isn't, and honestly the era right after isn't. Like, that shit is special. So
Super Nintendo games that age like Angela Bassett.
facts. That's a very good comparison. Yes, absolutely. I would have went with like Ava Mendez, but I feel you. But
And we're gonna argument for me either way.
absolutely. But yeah, now real quick before we jump into it, just to kind of break down things, do you want to give like a rundown of how the criteria works?
Yeah, so same as last week, we're going off a scale of 10 for each category. We got console appearance, controllers, games, graphics, and impact. Give us a nice score of 50. Last week or the last episode, I ended it with the Sega Genesis at a 39 out of 50, which actually was lower than I thought I was gonna have it, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had 42 out of 50, which same kind of a little bit lower, but I feel like it's a good reflection of the Genesis. Like, it was one of those consoles, but we'll talk about the Super Nintendo now. Um, so we'll start with console, of course, just kind of go down the list. And I'll just kind of throw out my bold statement here. I feel like the American version for once was the best looking version. Like, that purple and gray aesthetic was just too fire. The way it was on the controllers, where like the top two were a different shade than the bottom two, absolutely gas. And even outside of that, the different color, like, yellow, green, red, blue, whatever controller they had, they actually used that for the logo at first, and it kind of gave me PS1 logo vibes. So I can dig the aesthetic of the Super Nintendo, and for its time, I'm personally going to probably give it a 9.
yeah, I think I'm right there with you on a 9. I think that again, the same as the Sega Genesis, is kind of like this is the beginning of consoles. Really, I mean, the NES was literally just a box with a flap.
Yeah,
And then you got a little more creative with the next two. Um, but like you said, the color scheme carries it, man. I mean, it's to the point where like that color scheme goes hard now. If you put that shit on a Joy-Con, it is fucking incredible.
facts. That'll be one of the best looking ones you have. 100%. Okay, so yeah, 9 out of 10s across the board. I'm not mad at that. We don't really gotta dig into it too deeply. I mean, there were a lot of Genesis or Super Nintendos though. I will say that. I didn't even
Yeah,
realize that there were like Super Nintendo Juniors, like smaller versions of them, which I don't think they looked as good, but it was cool to have that compact version even back then. Like, it's crazy. It
you know
feels like
Nintendo
such
can't
a,
help themselves.
and honestly, it feels like such a modern, not even just Nintendo, but video game thing. But yeah, it's been happening since the beginning, folks. We always had this. I mean, the Master System had this shit, so it is what it
Right.
is. All right, but moving on to the controller, and here's where I think things get a little bit interesting, because we got to talk about criteria here. So, are we voting? Because like, if I'm putting these consoles up against each other, and then like we tallying up these scores and keeping tabs of like what our final score is. Are we doing controllers based on the time, or is it like overall, like how good is this controller today to pick up and like play with?
Well, see, my grade for the Genesis was just based on my experience with it at the time.
Hmm. Okay.
So that's how I've been grading it, is how I felt about it then. Um, because
Fair.
I mean, because yeah, it's a retrospective, but it's hard to grade it on today's criteria because the DualSense is a better controller than the SNES controller. I can't compare it in that way where I'm
Right.
looking at it through the modern lens.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly my dilemma because I'll probably give the Super Nintendo controller for its time about an 8 out of 10. Like it was fine. It was solid. I don't have any major complaints about it. I'm pretty sure the Super Nintendo, I don't know if it was the first one, but it had back buttons, right? Like it had an L and R button.
There was one with a back button on it.
Yeah, yeah, it was that's an early example of that, so that's pretty cool. I mean, it was fine. I think the shape was cool. Pretty standard ass controller in my eyes.
Yeah, I think this is the first like movement towards some level of standardization for controllers.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, the OG shit does have the diamond configuration, which I absolutely love. I made a really big deal about that in grading the Genesis controller. But yeah, no, it's just I mean it's a comfortable controller. The buttons work well. There isn't that like mushy feeling after like a bunch of use where it almost stops pressing correctly.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, that's a solid controller. I'd say an 8.
Okay. I'm not mad at us like being right on the same tier. I'm honestly gonna be surprised if that doesn't continue with these next three categories because we're getting into like the meat and potatoes of the whole thing right now. So the next category that we got on our list is games, which easy 10 for me. Like that's like one of the easiest 10s you could give me as far as grading a console's library. I think the Super Nintendo has, I don't know if, I mean, one of the best libraries ever in my eyes. You got like some of the best RPGs you've ever played, the Chrono Triggers, the Final Fantasy sixes, things that you may never have heard of. Like the one that I always harp on about is Terranigma, which only came out in like European countries. But it was a really dope and weird RPG about like changing the actual Earth, like the world we live in, like the real Earth, and it was pretty fucking crazy. Like there were so many hidden gems, Earthbound, you know what I mean? But even going out of RPG, like I don't want to talk it, go into everything, but I'm gonna let you speak. I'm giving this a 10 easily.
Oh no, this is a category I think we need to go into because again, yeah, like you said, 10. Like there's
Yeah,
no other grade. Anybody that says anything different is insane. This is a 10. I mean, just off the strength of Chrono Trigger and Super Metroid and Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario World, and I was supposed to stop 3 games ago.
yeah,
Like
exactly. That's
this
how I never.
shit was incredible.
Yeah,
And it's stuff
yeah,
that literally holds up to the you could pop that shit in or download it and play it, and it's just as fire as it was when it dropped. I mean, these games literally stand the test of time.
man.
There's not a whole lot of like there's filler on every console. Like there's for lack of a better term, shovelware on every console. But the
Yeah,
highs on this motherfucker, it's
hard
the
to beat.
it's so good it makes you forget that there's bad shit on it.
Facts. And like history does that too. And we've come a long way since the Super Nintendo, which kind of just gives us rose tinted glasses when we talk about it. But of course it does because it has masterpieces on that console. Like I talked about all those games. I did not mention Links to the Past. You know, the Zelda game that
Bruh,
some people still consider the best Zelda game. You know, I didn't
OG Star
mention
Fox.
Star Fox. You know what I mean? Like I didn't mention any Mario. Like Mario
F-
World. God,
Super Mario World 2,
yes.
F-Zero,
Yes,
um,
F-Zero.
Super
Super
Star
Metroid.
Wars.
Come on, man. Like second, both of our two finalists on our best game of all time were from this console. Like, how
Yeah,
can we not
that
give, not spoilers. I ain't gonna tell y'all what they were. Go watch the episode. But yeah, how can you not
fact.
give this a 10?
Yeah. I mean his shit, the unreleased shit. Star Fox 2. Nigga,
Man,
have you played
it's
Star Fox 2?
I haven't. But I mean, was that the
There
one that wasn't a
that's
remake
that's
of
the
the
one that's the one they didn't drop. They like
mm,
they damn near finished it and didn't
oh,
drop it.
and then put it on like
Um
a eShop, right?
I think they did eventually put it on the eShop, but it's for sure on the Super Nintendo Mini.
Okay, wow.
That's the only
Yeah.
reason I bought it. When they said it was on there, I was like, yeah, that's a cop. Because
That's
that's like
actually like
that's gaming history.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's actually
But
pretty
it's
dope
fire. And I'm like, why the fuck wouldn't you release this?
because they don't love our boy Star Fox, man. Like for some reason, that game, that series has so much potential. Even the Adventures line has so much potential, but
Adventures was incredible, and I will die on that hill
100%.
multiple
It
times.
listen, it really was. It was a particular era of Zelda likes that really popped to me. You had that, you had Okami, you had certain games that kind of like followed that archetype, but. And we'll talk about Star Fox in another episode, because I talk about a lot of different series that they have from this era that don't get love, like F-Zero. Thankfully we got F-Zero 99 recently, which was really, really amazing, but that just shows you how hard a modern F-Zero will go. Like that shit would be crazy.
Man,
But you see that you got it all here. Like this is when they were making Earthbound, and like putting out magazine ads for Earthbound. It was the worst ad I've ever seen for a game, but they put out an ad for that game trying to sell it on people. They believed in their Super Nintendo products. They put out the third Final Fantasy to make it to North America on the system, even though it was the sixth overall Final Fantasy, and
that
it was a
numbering was
hit.
so ridiculous.
It's crazy, and it's still confusing to this day, but you see how the Super Nintendo opened things up for like a different avenue of gamer, and it opened a lot of eyes. I can appreciate this console,
Nigga, we didn't even mention Super Mario Kart,
which is nuts. Like that's what opened. I mean,
which
Mario.
it would just went to my earlier point about multiplayer because I really feel like that was the game that kind of did it for
Yep,
everybody. Because like
absolutely.
you talking about a game that ruins friendships, like that's
Yeah,
it. That's the
yeah.
one.
I mean, the series has a lineage, and it started there. So fun fact about like the OG, the origins of Super Mario Kart. I want to say, I don't want to speak out of turn. I want to say it's a 007 game, but it was some kind of spy racing game originally that was built off of like the idea that if they slowed down F-Zero, it played like a totally different game. So like basically Super Mario Kart was just slowed down F-Zero. And one day somebody put like Mario's head on a character as a joke. And then they put his body on it, and then they changed the cart to look like a Mario Kart, and that's how Mario Kart was born. I think that's a pretty dope little origin story right there.
Holy shit.
Yeah, yeah. I love little stuff like
Does
that.
that
Like this
person get
is
royalties? Because I mean, if they did, they got to be rich.
yeah, because I mean, you look at what's happening right now with Mario Kart 8. You really put some money in Nintendo's pockets, man. I hope that you
Oh,
got what you deserved.
serious money.
But I think we can move to graphics because I think this kind of ties into games. We'll talk about games while we talk about graphics. This is also kind of an interesting one because of the era that it's in. I think for that era it was high ranking, like but it famously I think wasn't like the top tier. Um, I actually think Genesis might have had a couple games that outdid the Super Nintendo a little bit, but they had art style out the ass, like Nintendo style. You know how they do.
All right, so what you grading that?
Man, I was trying to pass the
You
mic
weren't
on
gonna
to
leave
you, so
that
you
shit on
would.
me. You ain't gonna leave that shit on me.
I tried, but
I already know what my score is. I'm comfortable with this motherfucker.
I'm probably giving it a nine. I was gonna go 10, but I'm probably gonna go nine. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but just because like, I feel like it wasn't a flawless console with when it comes to graphics. It just had art style that made up for any shortcomings that I couldn't see.
All right. And that's exactly why I'm gonna give it a 10.
Mm,
Because art style, graphics is easy to pull off. Graphics is about console power. Art style is difficult to pull off. And
yeah,
it's very, very hard to look at a game on the SNES that didn't have its own art style, didn't lean into it to the degree that it added to the game. Like you think about like Link to the Past and the way that shit looks, it's kind of still the template for a lot of Zelda aesthetic, even today.
that's facts. That is
And that's
facts.
just based on the art style. Like a lot of what you see out of Link's concept art and all of that stuff is still right up off of Link to the Past concept art pages. The F-Zero art style is totally unique to you. Ain't seen nothing else like it. Not even Wipeout. Wipeout is tried, but they kind of go with that muddied, kind of darker look.
Right.
F-Zero is bright. It's it's loud. It's in your face. Um, Chrono Trigger was interesting to me because you're basically talking about, and I guess while we're bringing up Chrono Trigger, rest in peace to the god Toriyama.
Rest in
Um,
pieces.
but his art style being put in that game, like we've seen it in Dragon Quest, we've seen it in Chrono Trigger, we've seen it in the Dragon Ball games,
Yeah.
but I don't think his art style has ever looked better than it did in Chrono Trigger, and
The,
that's something pulled off by the SNES.
absolutely. The one time I think I've seen it brought out of the comics and put into like a game is the new game coming out, that Sandlands, I think is what it's called. That's the
Yeah,
only thing I've seen that like, okay, it looks like Toriyama drew this game or whatever. But now Chrono Trigger, it stands alone as far as like bringing that vibrancy and like there's just something that feels like, yes, he's supposed to be doing the art for this. The main character is supposed to look dead ass exactly like Gohan with red hair. Like it it took things the extra mile. I think Yoshi's Island has one of the best aesthetics of any game ever. Like that shit
that's a
just
fact.
felt like happiness. Like that's just Yoshi's whole vibe. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Um,
you look at Yoshi's story, they just brought that shit into 3D.
yeah, exactly. And I mean that's why I was thinking about Yoshi's story, but it's just an evolution to that same style. Donkey Kong changed the game. Like people didn't know how they did that shit. Like Donkey Kong at the time looked like some of the most real shit you could see outside of Mortal Kombat. You know what I mean?
That
So
that mode 7 shit had people's eyes bugging out.
100%. So I'm not mad at it. The real reason that I gave it a nine is because I looked at my score from last time we did this, and I gave the Genesis a nine, and I think they're on par with each other, honestly. Like, and I don't feel like I can give one higher than the other when they're about the same. Like they're amazing, and this is still one of my favorite art styles. But yeah, I'm gonna probably throw it at a nine, especially since you had stuff like this was the era where they started adding CDs onto it to make it look better. Like I know that there was more that could be brought out of them. So,
Can't wait
but
till we get to the CD shit.
yeah, nah, that's gonna be. We got to do some more controversial constructs. So, let's talk about impact for the Super Nintendo because honestly, probably the easiest category. Just kind of gonna be a celebration of Super Nintendo. This is a 10 out of
Yep.
10. Like it can't not be a 10 out of 10. Like the Super Nintendo changed the game in so many ways. It kind of we talked about the Genesis helping to grow up games, but Super Nintendo helped to mature the product in a different way to where it felt more meaty as a product. Like you look at the older Mario games, even Mario 3, and the way that they first came with the open world or the hub world and everything, and how big that felt, and how Mario World just makes it like blows it out of water in the sense of like scope and like changing the world with the blocks that you can find and like the ghost houses and all that stuff. Like Super Nintendo had, Link to the Past again, Super Metroid again. These games like elevated their series to a place where they've still been chasing those highs for some people. So it's got to be a 10 to me.
Yeah, that's another easy ass 10. When you consider like what, because I think the Super Nintendo did more for Nintendo than the NES did. Because the NES kind of popularized the home console itself
Mm,
and kind of made that viable for everybody. But the Super Nintendo is the reason why we have Nintendo as it exists today. Like every
that's true.
single game they dropped that was like pure Nintendo banner, like first party shit, it's the shit that built everything. Super Mario World, Link to the Past, Super Metroid. That's the top three. Those three games are the standard bearers for the entire series that they represent. It's fucking insane. Like people
You, you,
still compare shit to that.
You know what it's like? It's like comparing like the Blades and the X-Men movies and Spider-Man to Iron Man. Like which one really popped up? Like those original Fox, Marvel movies, even Fantastic Four, those are like kind of like how the NES like started this shit. Kind of set the foundation, gave them the budget to do anything else. But the SNES was Iron Man. Like this was how the MCU started. This was how
Yeah.
Nintendo birthed its legacy and like started to build on these things in a way where we could continue making new characters. It wasn't just kind of like look at how different Mario 1, 2, and 3 were. Like Mario 2 was, famously a clone of Doki Doki Panic, right? Because Mario could be anything still. Like they were just kind of they could throw his face on a lot of things. And you can argue Mario World or Mario 3 was like a moment where he started to get personality, but nah, Super Mario World was like kind of that's when Yoshi popped up. That's when you started to see the cape. You started to see like the world building. Like, oh, this is Yoshi Island up here. Like there was a lot more that they was trying to do here. Also reflected in those RPGs I talked about. You could start telling these epic long ass stories on these consoles, and I can appreciate everything that it was. So I agree with you on that. Definitely a 10 out of 10.
I mean, when you look at like a game like Tunic as an indie game exists solely because of Link to the Past.
Yep.
Like it's basic. They basically brought Link to the Past to this era and then added like more modern features and some roguelike features and
Yeah.
but it's that and it's
Man.
all because of that game and we're in I mean that dropped in what 2022
Yeah, and like you
like
see, like it's still a hit.
dog is
It's
is insane. I
crazy.
mean
I
the
mean,
whole Metroidvania genre, even roguelikes owe something to that to Super Metroid and
yep,
Castlevania.
yep,
And
still
it's
harkening
it's
back to it.
all going back to that. Like everything you see now is a child or a grandchild, a great grandchild, whatever you want to call it, of the Super Nintendo. Like that shit is the console.
100%. It set the tone, and I can appreciate everything that you're saying. Like, look at something like Shovel Knight. You know what I mean? I had a couple different examples in mind, but it's just too many to kind of go down the list and draw on all of Super Nintendo's influence. So yeah, shout out to this one. Honestly, this is among one of my favorite consoles ever. So it's gonna be very interesting to see where this falls on the overall tier. Because for a long time it was like my number one, even though I didn't even have one. But we'll see how it stacks up. But speaking of that, let's go ahead and tally up our scores. I'm gonna do some quick maths here. I'm pretty sure I have. Yeah, so for me, I gave console a 9 out of 10. Controller 8 out of 10. Games got a 10. Graphics got a 9. And Impact got a 10. Um, and if my math is correct, that is a 46 out of 50.
Sounds about right. I'm looking at a 9 for console appearance, 8 for controllers, 10 all the way through for graphics, games, and impact. I'm 1 point above you at a 47.
Yep, that was the graphics. And, still a bit controversial because I know we love, pixelated graphics. I personally love pixelated graphics, but I'm gonna stand by that little 9 out of 10. I don't think taking one notch off is gonna kill
No,
my
it's
overall rankings.
I don't think people will look down on you as somebody that speaks on gaming because you were a
Oh,
point under.
I hope they do.
Although I'm sure there's some asshole that would.
I would really enjoy the smoke. I mean, don't let the people see my 8 out of 10 for controllers. That's 2 points. I might get killed out here, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, that puts Super Nintendo firmly above the Genesis on both of our lists. I
Which I think
think
is right.
yeah, I think a little bit higher than we both expected though. Like those were definitely like, two consoles that directly wage war with each other. So it's kind of interesting to see how far apart they kind of are starting to fall anyway. I won't say where
But
they'll end up overall.
I would say that the final scores being far apart is actually kind of indicative of how things went in that war. Because they were like they was trading blows, but at the end of the day, Nintendo followed it with the 64 and Sega followed it with the Saturn.
Yeah, yeah, you making some points. But shout out to Sega anyway, you know what I mean? This is definitely a Nintendo centric episode, but shout out to Sega. They made they sharpened that steel of Nintendo's sword. So
Yeah, look, we
respect.
we ain't here without them. So
Facts. Big facts. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to go and tie things up, man. Definitely let us know what you guys think of the Super Nintendo. I want to hear you guys' like favorite Super Nintendo memories in the comments below. Definitely leave a comment so we know you guys are loving the episodes. Like and subscribe because we need that interaction just to know that we are doing what you guys want to see because we want to make this channel for you. But until next time, man, I am Kendall. This is Tony, and make sure you keep gaming.